PV. Today I'm going for Google Kubernetes engine. So this is very important for GCP. The people who are preparing for interview for Google Cloud, or they want to change the job, or they want to increase their salary up to 200k USD. So they must learn about GCP. So today I'm going to this one introduction about Kubernetes and terms and working in Google Kubernetes engine, creating GKE cluster, deploying workloads, creating service, and config and maps and secrets and labs and cleanup. So one lesson is not enough to explain Kubernetes in detail. However, this lesson gives you little high level overview of Kubernetes. Kubernetes container is management tool created by Google. It was used to manage Google own infrastructure. Kubernetes is a giant server made of the small service, sometimes also called a Kubernetes cluster. So Kubernetes cluster is combination of many nodes. So node, if you see N1 standard, one GPU is one CPU, and node 2 also one CPU and 3.7 GB. So it's the same as like and it's up to many nodes. So this is four cluster nodes. So we understand what is the terms used for Kubernetes. First one is what is the pod. Pod is the smallest unit to deployment on Kubernetes. So very smallest unit of deploying Kubernetes. A pod can have multiple containers running inside it. So inside a pod can run multiple container, and the container, so these container and scale together say pod IP. So these, if you want to scale up, then all together the container inside scale up. Basically the pod is a copy of our application, right? Pod. So now the next part is the node. As you see in the previous screen, previous here, that this is the node pod, each pod. So node have inside a pod, right? So we are going for node. Node is the next level of pod. So node is an actual VM instance. Docker and Kubernetes are pre-installed in these machines. Pod are run inside the machine. Depending upon the configuration of node, you can have multiple or single pods running at a time in it. So in node, you can have multiple pods, So services are the endpoint of user. So in the cloud, usually we have endpoints. So endpoint, when we talk about endpoint is a service. So these interface between pod and world. So basically you are accessing cloud, you are accessing the node, you are accessing pod, and then the world. The pod IP can change when the pod is restarted. The service allows us to map our deployment to a specific endpoint. A specific endpoint we can deploy. So every regions have different endpoints, like Singapore, China, Germany, USA. Deployment is a definition of pod, and pod container and contains a copy of pod can fall these things. Deployment has a number of replica in a pod. It is a responsibility of deployment to maintain dimension the number of pods in the cluster of daemon sets. So this is type of controller used to run node level configuration. Daemon sets make sure that copy of specific software run each node. For example, monitoring agent to New Relic. Secrets. Secret is the mechanism for storing sensitive data. So secret is like sensitive data. We can pass on the sensitive data to the container at runtime using environment variable, or by mounting the data into volume. So secrets, like if you want to hide some ConfigMap, it's a similar to secret, except it's used for store non-sensitive configuration. This can also be accessed runtime by container. So these terms is very important, and you can read, pause the video and read these things. Now next we are going for working in. So high-level working Kubernetes can be explained with these steps. We can create deployment.yaml file, which include the pod definition, number of replica. For example, say we need 4 pod running any point of time. So mentioning the replica equal to 4, we will take care of that. Kubernetes read deployment file and create pod based on the node availability. At any point of If pod fails, Kubernetes will create new pods and remove the old one. Once we have pod up and running, pods are exposed using service. Again, pod IP is a service maps and permanent address. The pod can be accessed interactive or concurrent. So this is Kubernetes in the source. Kubernetes has also the component, and that also what most of Kubernetes courses cover. Let's look up Kubernetes architecture, and then you will see the Kubernetes engine, right? So this is Kubernetes cluster. First one is control panel here. So you see API, CCM, CM, etc.file, and then it's a cloud provider API. So cloud provider API go here, and then they access here, then they go to the nodes. Node have a kubelet, and kproxy, right? And then outside of this one, we have API server, cloud control manager, optional control manager, etc, kubelets. So those Kubernetes component. We will not go through each component in Kubernetes 8 this lesson. If you want to read about, I can create a separate course. Each component need to be configured at Kubernetes, and also that extra overhead. It's not a great, so for Kubernetes, I will create a separate course, but this is very high level, and we need high level at for Google, learning about Google certification. So Google Kubernetes engine. So this is in short called GKE, Google way to running the Kubernetes cluster. GKE take care of the management of Kubernetes 8, K8 cluster. So let's see how we can create cluster with minimal amount of inputs via form using CLI. So I have created here images. So you can go to Google Cloud Platform, and then you search Kubernetes Engine API from left side pane, GCP header starts service. So here Kubernetes engine, then you build and manage container-based application. This is the definition. So you can click enable this API. Overview and documents, and you can also go click on the create button and choose the standard cluster by clicking configuration. There is 3 sections up to fill: cluster basic, node fools, and cluster. So cluster basic, node full, and cluster. So these are 3 things we are going to choose. Cluster basic is, this is a cluster will be created with the name, version, and location that you specify here. After the cluster is created, name, location can't be changed. So remember, this is question they might ask. The once a cluster is created, name and location cannot be changed. Cluster name, I put cluster 1. The location type is zonal, the regional, zone level. So it will use regional, means it's regional level, US, zone, central, C, specified default location. This is section we create a standard GKE cluster. Cluster basic, this is include cluster name, location, and GKE master mode version. Name can be hyphen separate a small case alphabetic value. Location has 2 choices, regional and zonal. As usual, regional is more redundancy and availability. However, that is increase the cost as well. As GKE version can be static. We can select release channels automatically here, latest version. Okay, so the GKE version have rapid and regular and stable. Stable is 2-3 months after releasing regular. Regular is a 2-3 months after releasing rapid. Rapid is a Kubernetes release early as possible and able to new GKE features, like it's a kind of GKE new versions. Nodeful. Nodeful is the configuration of node in the cluster. It provides configuration for the nodeful, node security, and metadata. For full configuration, we can provide node full name, number of instances in the pool, and different flag like enabling auto scaling and specifying the master node location. Node security and metadata, those are things you can go here. So this is cluster networking metadata features, and then once you create on the, after selecting this one, deploying the workload. Now that we have cluster ready, it's time to deploy some containerized workload image in the cluster. So step would be like these: go to the workload tab, create and deploy button, fill the container details, fill the configuration detail, click on deploy. Go to the workload. So we have to go to here workload. Previously we created cluster. So then click on deploy, and after deploy we need to give the image path, and then environment variable, Okay, so application namespace, label, cluster. So next part about the configuration. Application name of the application, you can provide any alphabetical name. Namespace is logically separated pool GKE node. You can organize pod within the GKE nodes. Label is can be used to organize workloads. Cluster, it can be deployed in different cluster. Workload can deploy in different cluster. Currently default cluster is selected that we have created it earlier. So application name, namespace, label, app, value, configuration YML, cluster which we created earlier. So I think this is a bit tricky. You need to do the hands-on using GCP. It's provided free for learning. You just need to give credit card, creating service. So creating workload we created, cluster we created. Okay, these are tools. And exposing service, so we are going to create here this exposure service. So creating is three types of cluster IP, node port, load balancer. So this is the load balancer, have an IP address, then it will go to the node ports and cluster IP, and then it will go to the based on the load balancer service type of explanation here. So service type we use cluster IP, node port, load balancer. Then service type is created, so we use cluster name, namespace default, label is this one, logs, type, external endpoint, load balancer API. So there are many things. In this one basically you need to go through the documentation and deploy autoscale website Kubernetes. So basically what I'm trying to say here, I'm giving here Google Cloud document, deploy, scale and update your website with Google Kubernetes Engine GKE. So Google has provided user and then GCP platform, trigger build, then it will do cloud build, then cloud source, then it can deploy the GKE. Other way is cloud external IP, cloud load balancing, then it will service load balancer, then it will go to node 2 3. So there is a two-way to reach out here. You will learn about how to create GKE, how to create Docker image, Kubernetes requirements. So these are things you can go. This is step we already have. I am providing my video. Yeah. So all those things you can go learn about GCP. It's very important, and you will learn Docker, Kubernetes, GKE, cloud build, container registry. So a lot of things is here. Okay, and we have ConfigMap document also. I will provide how to do the ConfigMap, and also I will provide secrets. So to recap this one, basically what we learn about, I'm going here. So we learn about introduction of Kubernetes, what is the terms use, and then working Google Kubernetes Engine containing cluster, workload, service, and secrets. So four things we learn. Terms are, these are transport, node, service, deployment, and daemon set, secrets, config map. Then working, we created YML files and different here, and then we created four things like cluster, service, workloads, and configment and deployment. So this is quite boring, but I hope you like it. Please like and subscribe my channel.